So remember how we get to these tests and how we get to these confidence intervals, just like before in the 7.1 doing the binomial. So remember, we're going to hit the stat key, and we're going to arrow to the right twice so that we get to the test option. Now, what we're going to be using in this particular section is numbers 7 and 8. Number 7 is going to do our confidence interval if we can use Z's. And number 8 is going to do our confidence interval using T's if we don't have sigma. So we're going to use number 7, the Z's, if we have sigma, if we have a population standard deviation. And we're going to use number 8 if we do not have sigma. What you'll then notice, let's take a look at what you'll see in your calculator when you either select a Z interval or a T interval. So if you were to select number 7, the Z interval, what you would pop up is with a screen that looks like this. And you have an option of choosing either data or statistics. Notice, if you do data, it's going to still want you to go ahead and give sigma. It's got a reminder here. You still have to give it sigma. And it wants you to put all your data in list 1. That frequency below that just means that all your numbers in your list happen once. So you're probably going to leave that alone. Then your C level, just like before, is your confidence level. And so that will be another thing you'll fill in. This is if you're choosing the data option, though. Okay. Now, the other option that we have is to select stats, which means instead of giving me a list of data, they gave me a bunch of just random information. Notice they still want sigma, because if you're using Z's, they think you have the population standard deviation sigma. They also want the X bar, which is, remember, the sample mean. And they also want your N, which is the size of the sample. And they want your confidence level. This would all have to be given in your problem. And then you would do your calculation. And it would go ahead and just spit out the entire confidence interval for you. But again, the key with using the Z interval here is you have to know sigma. Now let's take a look what the T interval would look like in your calculator. So continuing along, the T interval looks almost exactly the same. You still have the same options. You have data or statistics, and this is again if we were choosing option number 8 from our list on the tests. And if you're choosing data, you have to have all your data in list 1. You leave the frequency of 1, and they want your confidence level. Notice they don't ask you for a standard deviation because you don't have sigma. Remember, the key with this is there is no sigma. So what it can only do is use the sample standard deviation, which means it can go ahead and find that for you using your data. So that's why it doesn't ask you for anything there, anything additional. However, look at the T interval if we were using statistics instead, meaning they just gave me a bunch of information in my problem. If they do that, they do want our sample mean. They do want SX. Remember, SX is the sample standard deviation, not the population. If you've got a population of sigma, you need to go back and use the Z interval. They also ask for our sample size, our N, and our confidence level. So it's pretty much the exact same information as what you were inputting into the Z interval. It's just, again, the only difference is the sample standard deviation instead of a population. Okay, then you can press calculate, and either the Z interval or the T interval, the first thing that you'll see that gets spit out is your confidence interval. So that's how you would use your calculator. You can also do any of these problems by hand. It's up to you. Doing it by hand means you need to actually figure out which error formula you're going to use. Either the Z's or the T's. And again, remember, it's all based on whether you have sigma or you don't have sigma, you've got S. You've got a sample standard deviation. However, notice, if you're going to do the formula by hand, that means you're going to have to find a critical value for Z, which means you're going to be using your inverse norm function on your calculator. Or if you're doing the same thing, you're using the error formula for T's, then you have to use your inverse T function on your calculator. As a warning, the inverse T function is only available on the TI-84 calculators. I don't believe it's on the TI-83. However, then that means you can find your T value using the T distribution table. On test day, though, that means if you're using your table, make sure you have one printed out that you can access, because you're going to be using it. Then you can, once you have your error, just like before, you're going to add the error and subtract the error. What are you going to add and subtract the error to? Remember, this time it's the mean that goes in the middle. So that's what you're adding and subtracting the error to. So we're going to do quite a few problems. We'll do them both ways, by hand and using your calculator, just to make sure we understand. Continue.